Okay, awesome. Well, I'm going to talk just for a little bit, just as people gather, so we don't miss the introductions, and just share a little bit. So I'm Emily. I'm the artistic producer at Actors Theater. I use they, them pronouns. I changed my pronouns, I think a couple of years ago now. Um, and one of the reasons that I wanted to gather this group is both personally, what had been for many, many years of my life a very personal, very private conversation, maybe just like a few close friends, my partner, that like affinity group where I'd use they, them and say gender fluid, but it wasn't sort of translating for me outside of that. When I did change my pronouns, it then became very public, very exposed. And as I texted Kevin one time after a very long day, felt like a part-time job, one that I was supposed to be an expert in. And then also being in an industry and working in casting, where I both personally and professionally at the time wasn't really in any room that was like this. And so I just want to set us up for what will be a continuation of a conversation that we all started to have a couple of weeks ago, and a conversation that we've had with many friends and in many circles, and just have that here. So let's just start with a round of introductions. I will just say your name so we know what order we're going into. Let's start with Will.
Hi, I'm Will Wilhelm, they, them. I'm an actor based in Chicago. I also spent a couple years, seasons at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which is where I met Emily.
Let's go to V.
Hi, I'm V. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm based in Louisville currently, and I did A Christmas Carol with Actors Theater last winter. And I've also worked with Houston Shakespeare Festival as well. So happy to be here.
All right, Sushma.
Hi, I'm Sushma. I use any and all pronouns, she, her, he, him, they, them, Caesar. And I'm currently a student at Ithaca College. I'm a senior, but I have worked at Actors Theater this past winter. I did The Wolves, and then I also worked at Mixed Blood Theater in Minneapolis, and I've done New York Musical Festival in 2018, and Pride Place 2019, and I kind of just go where the work takes me, so I don't really know where I'm based, but that's me.
It all looks the same these days anyway. Okay, let's go to Kevin and Armand.
Hi, my name is Kevin Cantor. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am an actor, director, spoken word poet, and freelance consultant. I met Emily when I was an acting apprentice at Actors Theater of Louisville in 16, 17. That sounds right. And I have worked as an actor and a freelance consultant for companies such as the Milwaukee Repertory Theater, B Street Theater in Sacramento, Statera Arts, and Arizona Theater Company, where I am currently sheltering and where I met Armand.
Hi, I'm Armand Fields. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. I'm an actor, writer, drag performer, and I have yet to meet Emily or the ACT family, but I know I was put in contact with you through Kevin, and Kevin and I met during Georgia McBride at Milwaukee Rep that then came to Arizona. And we're sheltering in place here. So.
Directed by Meredith McDonough. Meredith McDonough brought us together.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And I did get to watch that production of Georgia McBride. So.
Lordy Lord.
So when we all first gathered, there's like a couple of topics that I will use as helpful today, and certainly use to start us out. And then, for those who are joining us, at any time, if you have questions, if you want to share them, we'll either answer them as we go, or we'll leave some time at the end. So, but our first sort of conversation prompt is the non-binary experience is not a monolith. And maybe Kevin, since I think that those were words from your mouth, if you want to just start us out there.
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a phrase that I felt has needed to be repeated in rooms in which I'm asked to speak on behalf of our entire community, right? And I feel like a lot of marginalized voices, when invited into rooms, are asked to do that in some way, shape, or form. And while, yes, it is important, I think, when you are programming work that centers TGNC experiences, trans and gender nonconforming experiences, you have those voices in the room helping to shape those narratives, if not leading the shaping of those narratives. But it is also important to remember that we are not monoliths, that it is impossible to speak on behalf of all non-binary people, all TGNC people, and moreover, that there is no right way to inhabit this identity. I think that often cis creators, cis casting directors, what have you, have an idea in their mind of what non-binary means. And that often involves a lot of androgen, a lot of perception of some sort of in between, in the middle of our understandings of what cis maleness and cis femaleness is. And there is no one right way to inhabit this identity, as made evidence by the room that we've created right here. I'll pass it on.
I know even for me, like, I was thinking, like, not even like getting to like the performing stage, but even just like auditioning. Like, I feel like like whenever I go to auditions, it's like it's also I came out end of my sophomore year, so I wasn't really in the professional world just yet. But then when I did after that summer, I remember thinking like, well, what do I wear to auditions? Because I don't, because because I have like I have body hair, and so I'm like, well, some people perceive my body hair as more like masculine, but then people see me being Indian and then also having long hair, so I'm perceived as more feminine by some people. And then I was like, and then even recently, I like decided I wanted to paint my nails, and like as like a female bodied person, I'm like, oh, that's like playing into this like gender thing, but also I'm like, but wait a minute. And then I remember what you said, Kevin, about like how it's not a monolith, and that even though whatever I do, me as Sushma, whether it's like career or even just like personal life, it is not, it's my non-binary experience, but it is not the whole non-binary experience, but it is mine, and it's like valid in that way. And I shouldn't have to constantly worry about being seen as the way certain like cis casting directors or producers would view a non-binary person, because it isn't all the same.
And to me, there's almost like a deep irony in assuming that there's one way to be non-binary, because I don't, and again, anything that I say, I will speak from my own experience, but I imagine that many non-binary people experience a rejection of social norms or behavioral norms or aesthetic norms of what it means to be a man or a woman, like, no thank you. And so the idea that there's a conforming way to be gender non-conforming is like so antithetical to the name and the idea itself. So yeah, when I get asked to speak, to shed light on the non-binary experience, I'm like happy to shed light on my experience. I'm happy to hypothesize what might be similar, but yeah, I just can't, especially when it comes to like representation in media, and we have one idea of like this very androgynous person, and it's almost like it's almost fetishizing in a way at the very beginning of what we think a non-binary person should be. It's like, ooh, I can't tell, is it a man, is it a woman, I'm gonna, no. The point is that I'm choosing not to conform to someone else's ideas of how I should act and behave and look and speak and do all those things. So as soon as Kevin reminded me of that phrase in another call that we were in, I was like, yes, that's exactly the phrase that I like to remind myself now, that my experience is mine. I'm sure there's a lovely Venn diagram where a lot of our stuff intersects, but it's not a monolith. It's not singular. That's so antithetical.
And to Sushma's point about just the way you reference about painting your nails, is that I think often, especially in our industry, in which that could lead with the image quite often. I think that we're pressured, and this is TGNC folk at all, not only in our industry, but I think it's compounded by what we do, that we have to present in a way that validates our own transness or non-binariness. And the fact of the matter is that I don't owe my body to anyone. That I am always who I am, despite how I look or how I'm presenting, right? And moreover, that gender identity does not begin and end with the body. That our presentation is a way in which we make our identity manifest as a means for others to, metabolize it easier, but it is not in and of itself what our gender is, which leads to what is gender on stage, like that we think that there is a right way to be a man and woman in the world leads to the idea we think there's a right way to be a man and woman on stage. And none of that is true.
Well, it's just funny because like if you really think about like back to what you both were saying about like I can't really think of anything that is truly a monolith. So like the fact that like what Will was saying is like how could like being like gender non-conforming be a monolith? Like if it's like not, yeah, it's crazy. How can anything be one thing is beyond me. But
well, and I do think some of it comes from and V, please jump in, but I think some of it comes from people don't want to be wrong. So they need to know everything about what it means, how to identify it, so that they can get it right and not offend anyone and know. And I think what we're sharing is it's more complicated than that, but it's also more simple than that because it involves just learning that we also decided what men, what women, we've decided all the things that these terms embody to begin with. And so some of it is just unlearning. V, let me go back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch off of Kevin's point about it being a lot of pressure to be non-binary enough. I think that I've had a lot of pressure that I've put on my own self about worrying that audiences will perceive me as a female body, that I'm assigned female at birth, so therefore I must be that when I perform. And if I'm in a certain costume, I think that has, it depends on, let me back up. I think I'm starting to understand what my limitations are, or not my limitations, but my own boundaries when it comes to being a non-binary person in this industry and like what roles I take. And I'm starting to realize that maybe roles that are in the female binary are not for me. And somehow that makes me a little bit like, I feel like I'm selling out in some way. But I feel like it's my own experience, like Sushma was saying, where this is my own non-binary experience. And yeah, I think that, I don't know, it makes me question a lot of like my thoughts before in the past about non-binaryism. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. Do you all ever find that when you are cast in a certain role, you feel like dysphoric at times, or that something's just not right? And what is your all's experience in that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is translating into a conversation that's about casting, and even being in the theater is all about how does this person casting this show or even watching this show, how do they see me and my body, and how do they understand me and my body? And some people are going to be a lot more narrow than they are, in my dream world, it would be very wide. I can look at any of your bodies and see anything that you say it is or that the world says it is, because I think everyone here, and hopefully a lot of people listening, see gender as like an inherently performative thing. So yeah, in me and my body, there are a lot of theaters and people in the world that will see my body as like exclusively and narrowly male, and that will be the sort of opportunities that I'm given. And when that comes, you know, over and over and over and over again, that is so dysphoric to me. I hope, almost on the other side of that. There was a time where I feel like that caused me a lot of pain. And now I'm moving into a place that is a little more varied, and I am getting a more like leeway and more room to experiment for myself from people who are kind of with it. And the experience of being able to do that and be more of my true self, or even auditioning for roles that are written for cis women. I'm, you know, maybe I'm not gonna book it, but the fact that someone said that I have something to offer that and they're gonna at least consider that idea makes me feel closer to when I do inevitably play male roles, which will, you know, maybe be the bulk of my resume for the rest of my life, I don't know. It unlocks a little bit more freedom for me to feel like I am putting on this gender in the same way that I put on this costume. And it is me, it is, you know, it is not me, but I am a vessel, I'm a talented performer that understands the conceit of performing maleness. I was forced to do it for a long time, in the same way that I understand the conceit of performing femaleness or neither. But it's not I need a distance from that before I can even, I'm just taking very baby steps towards not feeling triggered in that way. And I think it takes time.
All right, y'all, we are getting so many questions. So thank you everybody who is listening and watching. We have a comment: the world needs more representation in writers' rooms and at the casting table. Thank you. Armand, I'm gonna ask this question to you, if you could start it. So we have someone who just graduated. Where would be a good place to go to start auditioning as a non-binary actor? And of course, there's a unique moment in time now, but generally, you know, where might somebody begin, or what could they look for as a place to start?
Hi.
We got kicked off.
We got kicked off. Yeah, we're back. I mean, my suggestion would be, you know, start looking at a lot of the LGBTQIA plus theaters, you know, About Face Theater, where I'm an artistic associate at in Chicago. They're a great organization to look at. Also, you know, a lot of the big agents in like larger towns they have a whole section of non-binary performers, you know, so they're always looking for that. I say also look at theaters who are doing the work that is bringing up these conversations, you know, like Steppenwolf in Chicago, or like other places like ACT, you know, and it's just like, that's how would be my recommendation. But before we got kicked off, I wanted to add to the conversation right quick what we were talking about as far as like, you know, for me, my personal journey to this non-binary state that I find myself in, it's been this like conversation between my acting and just sort of like who I am. And I never really did a lot of like cis straight male roles when I first started, you know, and then once, and I also wasn't working as much, you know, but then it's like, soon as I started like doing drag, that also opened another door and the roles started coming. But then I think as the world and our language in performance arts started expanding and the types of characters started expanding, I started booking those. And then once I started doing these other gender variant roles, I started to have the conversation personally with myself of like, how do I identify? You know, so it's always been sort of this like conversation back and forth between my career and my personal identity. And I've allowed, in some ways, in a lot of ways, the work to inform me. And also with that work came introduction to individuals who are more, versed in these types of conversations than I am. And that starts my mind to ticking. And I'm so grateful for that, So it's really just like, it's definitely one of those things of getting centered and like in yourself and like being quiet and still and being able to listen and see where the work is guiding you or where the people that are coming into your life are, what they're telling you, So in some ways that kind of like goes to this question as well. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, I wouldn't necessarily look at what theaters are auditioning non-binary actors, but who's doing the work that you personally identify with and the stories, who are telling the stories that you want to tell. And I say, to hell, whatever they think, go into the room and show them what you think this story or how this character should be portrayed. You know what I'm saying? Despite their gender or whatever,
That's great. I'm gonna group together. We're having a lot of great questions, and some of them are related to, what is a piece of theater that really spoke to you as a non-binary person? Do you feel like you're seeing your story on stage? Let me see another way of asking that. Oh, there's some really great questions. Okay, so let's just speak to that, since Armand, you were leading us that way, of what is the theater that's really speaking to you right now, or the writers or the work? Where are you seeing yourself on stage?
I'm gonna start here by saying this, even though I'm like, I don't know why I'm hesitant to say it. The place that I see myself the most is when I see non-binary actors existing on stage. And by that I mean that frankly, there are not, I can't think off the top of my head, especially in theater, many shows that involve specifically non-binary characters, very few. So in lieu of that, allowing TGNC actors, non-binary actors, to just exist on stage and in space, like,
Oh no, I know their Wi-Fi connection is a little spotty, and I don't want to speak for Kevin, but I want to say where I think they may have been going, which is that it's wonderful to see when non-binary actors get to just tell a story and not have to have like, my entire presence is about my transness. My entire, hi, you're back.
Hi. What happened?
I tried to riff on what you said, saying like, it's amazing to see non-binary people or trans people on stage where their entire presence is not about their transness.
Yes, that my trans is not the most interesting thing about me. Or it doesn't have to be in the stories now. So like, allow me to do my job, and really it. I know that that's sort of like a work of the question.
Okay, I think we got most of it. Okay, here's a question from Maya. Is there anything else you wish gender-conforming performers did know or respected more about being a non-binary performer? And there was another question similarly about how stage management can best support. I think those are two great questions for us to go to next.
Mine is quick. I mean, I think the one thing that I just wish that gender conforming folks and actors would respect more about TGNC folks and like non-binary folks is like, whenever we tell them, or sorry, for me, my experience, whenever I tell somebody something that like I'm doing or like, making a choice about, for them to be like, oh, well, because of this, wouldn't you, like, making assumptions based on my identity of like, well, because you're, gender non-conforming, wouldn't this make more sense? And it's like, I wish you wouldn't tell me what choices I should and shouldn't be making, or what I should and shouldn't be doing based on my identity, based on like whatever you think it might be. And even though that might be somebody's experience, I'm not saying that it wouldn't be, but it might not be mine, and usually it has not been mine. So that's what I wish they would stop doing, is assuming. And assuming in general is just like not always a hot thing.
I think also, to loop in the perspective of stage management, an ideal stage manager for any actor is my ally, like in a grand sense. So if a stage manager is working with a non-binary or gender non-conforming or trans cast member, all of my greatest stage management allies, I've been, had private conversations with, before the process or at the beginning of the process, to be like, hey, let's identify some common scenarios and let's identify how you could be my ally. The most, I think, obvious to a lot of people is the misgendering and misuse of pronouns. And, hey, if I got a great job at a huge theater and I'm a young actor and I'm just so happy to be there and I'm working with this director that has a Tony Award, and like, it might feel uncomfortable or impossible for me to stop the choreographer and stop the director in the middle while they're just like moving bodies around and be like, hey, they. I would love to feel like I'm gonna not miss that opportunity ever, but it's not always the case. So knowing that you can have a stage manager who's gonna be that squeaky wheel for you, is like, the best situation in the world. And then when it's a situation that's a little less obvious to someone who maybe isn't also non-binary, then I know I can come to that stage manager after the fact and be like, hey, so this thing, no one meant me any harm, I'm sure, but this is how I received it. And things are so complicated. Like if you're in a musical and they're like, okay, men over there, women over there, like, using this part, and I'm like, okay, well, what if there's just words and sensitivity around the way that we as humans removing ourselves from gender have to deal with our bodies and our capabilities and how the world is taking us in. So it's the same way as just being a good stage manager, I think.
Yeah, I think also too is like one of the things I think that a lot of actors in general, we get into these spaces where it's like, this is our job, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, this is a new opportunity and maybe a bigger opportunity than we've ever experienced before. So sometimes like you don't feel you have the agency or like sort of the wherewithal to just kind of like stake your claim in this space where you're like new to, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is my job. And like, I don't want to like step on anyone's toes, but it's like also like, yeah, like Will was saying, identify those people whose job it is to be on your side, you know what I'm saying? And just pull them aside and have those conversations and feel like, you can, absolutely, and these people are sort of put there in place to make sure that you feel safe, I know just coming to like a new production, you don't know exactly where everyone is, or as far as like their awareness of gender expression, so it's just sort of like, and
I think to that point as well, it's a good time to remind everyone, oh, did I freeze again?
No.
Oh, great. Yeah, I got nervous. That we're not monoliths. So when you working with new folks, ask them what they're, new TGNC folks, what are best practices for them? And as a stage manager, whoever's running the room, you initiate that conversation. Don't wait for the performer to do so. And it's not always just because I don't feel like I have agency to correct someone in the moment. Sometimes I literally don't have the emotional bandwidth.
That's true.
I am there to do my job. And if I did have to stop the room every time someone misgendered me, we would never be able to, as a group, get through the goddamn day. So have the stage manager check in and ask individual performer, would you feel comfortable with me correcting someone in the moment, even if you're present? When you don't, would you like me to let them know after the fact? You know, like, these are important questions, because if someone, an ally, a friend, a stage manager, whatever, calls someone out on their misgendering of me in the moment when I didn't, you can probably take the cue from me that I didn't, that I don't have the time. So you doing it in the moment as well doesn't really help anyone. Again, that's personal preference. Also, cis folk, introduce yourself with your name and pronouns at table reads, company meetings, talkbacks. Don't make me be the only one who does it, and therefore other myself in front of a room full of people I just met.
Right, and I think, you know, this is the first production that I've been on where I was with another non-binary actor, and it was such like a learning experience, I think, because usually and also such a fucking gift, because how many times are we the only ones in the room? You know what I'm saying? And so to have someone in a production with you who is also, you know, identifies as other, you know, it's just like how, and also for me, where I'm at, just like to be able to learn how Kevin navigates, and then also shows me how I want to navigate in a room, myself in a room. And so it's just like one of those things where it's like, it's funny, like we're having this conversation now, because it's just like one of those things where I was like, yeah, I think it would have been helpful for me as well, and for Kevin, if we did like identify or just like talk about how we want to sort of pronoun ourselves, you know, or present ourselves in rooms, you know, because I think having someone, like just knowing that someone is on your side is just monumental, but also just having knowledge of how other people want to sort of navigate their non-binary life, you know, is so helpful, and it's so informative.
Okay, so many questions. Let me move on to this one. And I think that we touched on this early on, but specific to casting, but a really a bigger question in here. As an assigned male at birth, non-binary person, I've had male roles available to me my whole life, i.e. the vast majority of roles. I'm diving back into acting for the first time as an out non-binary person, and I feel weird about taking women's roles because there are already not enough. Can anyone speak to that?
I don't know. I don't know if either of you want to jump in on that.
No,
but,
you start.
Yeah, yes. I hear you. I don't know who asked that question, but hey, here's the thing. I agree, and I want more opportunities to be available for women, including all of those roles that were written for men. Like, I'm kind of walking into the idea with like, this is all performative. I don't want anything to be limited. I don't want to be limited in what kinds of, you know, like non-racially specific or like non-ability specific. Like, if a role is open to the experience of what that person's story is, I want to be considered for it, because I am going to be as bold as to say that most stories are not about being a man or about being a woman. It's not so important that you're the son or the daughter, you're the person's child. That's the relationship. Not that there are none, because, you know, if there were, I'm not going to walk in and audition for Dryland or a play that's about abortion or a play that's about, you know, something that I'm like, you know what? I know better that me and myself and my body, I'm never going to have that experience, and that's not mine to tell. But most male roles are not, you know, should be a bit more widely available. Most female roles should be more widely available. So that sort of internal conflict, I feel like, yeah, it's going to be there, and I think it's there because our mind is in the right place, and we don't want to be taking things away from women. But in us trying to like break down those barriers and make things a lot less strict, I hope that we're opening up roles for women. I hope that is the, yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna take this question as like a big piggyback to talk about oh God, how do I phrase this? In regards to, okay. Again, to Will's point, if you see yourself in that role, if you see yourself in the lived experience of that character in any way, shape, or form, regardless of the way, what gender it was written with in mind, you're not taking anything away from anyone. You're making room for yourself. And I think that we have to get out of the mindset of, in making room for yourself, you are taking away opportunities from other people. That's, I don't think, is the case. And moreover, I think a lot of here's an example. Productions, specifically often classical works, canonical works, that feature an all-female cast, make me feel hella excluded, incredibly excluded. And often those all-female casts are not all women. It is all cis women, or all white women, all able-bodied women, and that's not all women. And then we sometimes will slap the label of that on something as a directorial approach to the work. And sometimes we have to go deeper than thinking that gender swapping, which is something that I hate that term, is like an insightful directorial approach to something. What you're doing is making room, but you are limiting yourself to the room in which you are making for all folks. Now, that's not to say I don't understand the need for affinity spaces, the need to explore work through a specific lens as a means to illuminate things. Totally get that. But I think when we start treating gender, and specifically binary gender, as a strong enough vantage point to carry a production, that we're really doing a disservice to ourselves and to the scope of the work that we can create.
That's so smart. And like, the only thing I want to tag onto that is that, like, we have to stop treating gender in our world and in our lives as so essentialist. And the entire point of theater is to make believe and imagine. So I would love to see shows that are not gender swapped, that are not all this, that are not all that, that are just gender imaginative. And you, the person who asked this question, by being imaginative about what female roles you connect with, empowers other people to be imaginative about the entire industry. I hope.
The future is free of gender essentialism.
There is a question around that. I think the other part of this conversation that's in several questions is about safety. So one of the questions is about, how do theater goers support more open casting in terms of diversity and race? How do we support our more rural communities that this conversation would feel extreme to? You know, how do we open doors in a safe way? Because I do think there's an element sometimes that I feel of, all this wonderful conversation has happened in the casting room, in the rehearsal room, and then you sort of get to tech and the show, and it's just a whole other group of people now in conversation with you, and you as the people who are on stage in front of that group, hopefully one day on stage again in front of that group, you know, that making that as safe as anyone can have control over.
I saw a question that was like addressing like specifically like NBPOC folks, and like someone mentioned size as a GNC plus size actor of color. For me, I find that it's like in terms of feeling safe in a space, it's about finding rooms and meeting people and creating work with people who you know are questioning their own bias and multiple facets of not only just the queer spectrum, but also like the size spectrum, as well as the color spectrum. You know, often, you know, being Indian, I feel like people often see the world as black and white, and often, you know, there's such like a size thing as well of like, you know, seeing like, you know, people who are slimmer as like, you know, being certain traits like desirable, this and that, and then whereas like fat people are like undesirable, lazy, like the butt of the joke, or like, and then, you know, so on and so forth. For me, I find it's like picking, you know, your battle day by day, but also, you know, but even just knowing that like entering rooms, even if you don't feel super safe, like knowing that you even just like you entering a room to audition, or even like a performance room, is challenging that and is making rooms safer for people who are also like you for generations to come and like people to come. And not saying it's fair whenever the, you know, experiences are uncomfortable or do make you feel a little bit unsafe. But I don't know if this is answering the question, but I really want to address those questions because I totally feel whoever is asking, because it is super important when, you know, it's not only just one intersectionality of being non-binary or GNC, but also having other layers to that make the battle a little bit more uphill sometimes. But it's totally worth it, and it's really hard sometimes, but it's also super worth it whenever you walk into a room and see people shift in their chair or like look a little uncomfortable, but knowing that you're challenging something that needs to be changed, and that makes people question their bias. And you know, but nothing is better than having somebody like look at you and judge you, or, you know, have a bias towards you, and then opening your mouth, or, you know, or saying something or performing something and having them look up and like see what you have to offer and see what is special in you, or see what you bring that they wouldn't have thought before. I don't know that I answered the question. I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that quickly.
Well, I think they're hard questions, is that no one can make it completely safe for somebody else. And the live experience and the audience add a factor that brings something new to every process. And maybe if there's just anything that people have experienced that did work or did feel supportive or was helpful as a show transition to that space.
Coming into Actors last winter and walking in the room and everybody sharing their pronouns was one of the most electrifying experiences I think I've ever had. I've only been out for a year as non-binary, but I know that the extra steps people took to talk to me and ask me if they were unsure about my pronouns, or if anything was needed to be addressed, people would come up to me and privately talk to me to the side, or catch me after rehearsal. And I felt like I was taken care of. So in that respect, just talking to people makes that transition a lot easier. Having those private conversations to decide, or public, if you need to, make them public, make them public.
I would say that examples, like using actual anecdotes, if you will. The first time in my career that I was actually, as a TGNC actor, playing a trans role was a big moment for me. It was very watershed. And I think what made me feel the safest, the quickest, was that when I first landed boots on ground, there were several microaggressions off the bat. Oversights, not intentional, things that they didn't know. And when I brought it to their attention, were immediately course corrected. No one had to ask a second time. I never had to ask a second time. And that's important, I think, that, you know, I don't expect everyone to have the same level of understanding of gender identity as I do, as someone who lives it every day. But I can expect you to hear me the first time I say it, for it to matter to you enough to course correct. Also, my well-being, our well-being, is more important than your artistic vision. And by that I mean the well-being of your, yeah, everyone's like, what? The well-being of the people that you're bringing into the room, whether it's your actors, your people working tech, no matter who it is, directors, playwrights, etc., everyone who's part of the process, our well-being is more important than our product. And I think that we forget that sometimes as a community, right? And the reason I bring that up is that in this show in particular, there was discussion around whether, bless you, Sushma, was around whether or not we should dead name my character in the program to keep an element of surprise about the narrative. And I was like, okay, first off, let's not dead name the character in the room to me when we're rehearsing. You know, this is her name, it's always gonna be her name. And every time you dead name someone in my presence, even if it's a fictional character, it upsets me. Trust that your audience will care enough about me and the performance I give to not feel shorthanded by a reveal by not dead naming me in the playbill. You know, things like that. Like, and these are important conversations to be had. But again, yes, my well-being, our well-being as a collective is more important than our product, than your artistic vision is the thesis statement of that rant.
And I think we're probably amidst a group that all know what dead name means. But I think what I would say is, I'm not going to define it, but it's an example that I just want to pull off of, like, when you hear something that you're unsure about, especially in the age of Google, you just go there and you help yourself to find some of that knowledge. You just take a little note. I think many of us can say also, like, our own relationship with our identity is fluid and is a learning process. There's no way I could identify all the gay pride flags if I tried, if there's 85 of them now. So I just think, you know, it's like, just hear that and then just investigate it. Like, and don't stop yourself from that discovery because you're embarrassed not to know. Okay,
I also just want to very quickly on this conversation, because it's a very complicated conversation that we're going to scratch the surface of. But this part, like the question around safety, is, I think, the part that most intersects with privilege. I mean, most, but it's a part that very largely intersects with privilege, because the ability to have my own safety a lot of the time is pretty much my ability to advocate for myself at any time. And thank you, Sushma, for saying what you said, because we started this conversation talking about monoliths and, you know, how, like, not all non-binary people are androgynous, but what's implied in that, there's the image that people have of, like, a non-binary person is also a white person, is also a thin person, is also a young person. Like, you know, and there is a spectrum on all of these things, and non-binary is as complicated an idea as the breadth of the human race. I will say, though, that the best way to make sure that you are safe is to find a way to be able to advocate for yourself, and that it's not something that is easy or given to you. I encourage you to find any way that you can practice that, to find you know, someone who you feel safe with, an individual, and practice advocating for what you need out of a room. I was in a show at Steppenwolf where we were in the pre-show harassed by an audience member and thrown things at. I was like, what century do we live in? I feel like I'm having rotten fruit thrown at me on the stage. And so it had to come down to me and the other performer being like, we will not come back on this stage until there is more security measures, because we don't feel safe doing our job. And it's not a little thing. We do need to feel supported, especially by a large institution. And they were very receptive, and, you know, they did it. But that also, you know, came from the point of, in my life, I don't think twice about saying that for myself. And if you are a person that is creating with a trans or gender non-conforming person, and there is any element of trauma that is involved in the story, hey, I get it, it's a part of the experience. I really wish that all art weren't about that trauma, but let's just say, for whatever reason, it's a part of the story. Please, dear God, let that person lead you. Follow their lead, please. And Sushma, I think you touched on this a little bit too. Please don't be prescriptive on what that needs to look like or what that needs to evoke. Please, dear God, let me lead that. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, we have a little bit of time left. Let's bring up, there's a question here, and I think this goes along with casting, goes along with all roles, goes outside of theater. But a challenge of navigating personal and professional identity in an industry that can be very brand and image based. How do you navigate maybe having to fluctuate identity while also trying to confidently represent yourself in a professional space where you might be the only TGNC person? And I think that also applies to like walking into a casting room or rehearsal room or meeting room, you know.
When I come into a casting room, I feel like my goal is to be as me as possible. So like whatever role I'm stepping into, that is me. And I find that helps me in the room because I feel like professionally I'm standing up for myself and also like in identity-wise as well. And I feel like that's the best way that I found that to stand strong in a room and to introduce yourself to other people by putting your best step forward is just is being you fully and the character as yourself, everything. That's the best way I found so far.
Yeah, I think also too, you know, it's kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's just sort of like picking and choosing your battles, you know. I just, as a Black person and as a TGNC person, you know, it's like sometimes I'm the only Black person in the room, you know what I'm saying? And sometimes it's like, I got to go to bat for that, you know what I'm saying? And it's just sort of like, it is a constant navigation, but just know that like, if you ever feel uncomfortable or unsafe, you gotta speak to it. You gotta share that with someone that you feel safe sharing that with, because otherwise it's just gonna bottle up and come out in other ways, you know what I'm saying? And it will affect your job. It will affect your mental health and wellness as well, you know? And it's just, also I appreciate Sushma, what you speaking to earlier, you know, just being a Black TGNC plus size person as well myself, you know, I'm not the normal size, shape size, you know, or whatever the fuck that means, but like, but yeah, exactly. But, you know, it's just, I think just knowing what's important to you artistically and professionally, and also just identifying like with what is your job, you know what I'm saying? What did you come here to do? You know what I'm saying? Are you here to teach people the experience of a Black person? Are you here to teach people? And sometimes you're there to teach, but like also just know that you don't have to carry that weight. And it is not your job to have to teach people constantly, you know? And it's just like, it's okay to just be tired sometimes and just not. So that's what I'm saying, just like pick and choose your battles, you know what I'm saying? And it's just like, just know that like, you are beautiful and bold and brave, and you are never alone, you know? And sometimes the person who is I like to say accomplice, because allies are great, but like we want someone who will will accomplish with us, you know what I'm saying? Help us accomplish these tasks and these battles, you know? But sometimes they don't look like, yeah, sometimes they don't look like you, and sometimes they don't, you know? And just know that there are people out there who are on your side, both professionally and personally. And not everyone has the answers on how you should walk your life, or how even like they don't know how you should present this character. I think the thing is like not to get in your head that like the directors or producers know how this character should be. That's why they hired you. because they see that you can take this character and run with it and tell them sometimes something new that they didn't know about this character.
I mean, yeah, certainly in the theater, when you walk into the room, to V's point, I think it's most important, especially when you're meeting someone for the first time, to let them know who you are before you let them know how well you can play this role. Because if you let them know who you are, then you've established a relationship on a personal level. And I think that to the question, that if you feel, because you don't know who's going to be in the room, or you do know who's going to be in the room and you know what they're like, that you need to present a cisser version of yourself, or because you want to, or for whatever reason, that does not make who you are less of who you are. That sometimes we are still working in a flawed system, and we need to fucking work. So it's not on you to to fix the system every time you walk into a room. Moreover, when I know that Emily's going to be in the room, if I'm auditioning for Emily, you bet your ass I'm gonna wear a dress to that audition no matter what I'm doing, because I know that they're in that room and they have my back. If you meet your friends, you meet your accomplices, there are times in which, yes, you have the freedom to be yourself however you want to be. And that person knows that however you show up that day is not intrinsically tied to your ability to do the work. Because it's not.
You know what's funny? You know what's funny and then not funny is also, I feel like I was so much more effective when I used she, her. And now, like, that I use they, them, it feels personal to people, So I don't know. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll just code switch that sometimes. Okay, we are pretty much at time. But Sushma, I was gonna say, could we just go over so.
Sorry, there was one question I really hope that we could answer.
I was going to say that if maybe we could pull out some things that we thought we didn't get to.
Yeah.
If people are willing to stay a little bit longer. Lots of requests for part 2. So we'll offline about that. But this has been really wonderful for everyone who's been with us for this, and we'll just stay over just a little bit. And if you all just want to scroll through to see if there's anything I may have missed as I tried to read and combine. And so Sushma, please, what was the one that caught your eye?
Just quickly about somebody who said, Sage, I work mainly with youth. Any advice on starting a conversation about identity or pronouns with youth, especially if they are still unsure about how they want to identify? I think it's super important, that's the only time that we can shape young minds to be as open and as accepting and as tolerant as possible. So I think what's important is in any setting, whenever you're introducing to each other, kids, having them say their name and pronouns. And also I think just assuring them and letting them know that they have agency in their expression and in their identity. And that also, kids have so much more life to experience, right? So through that time, you remind them, you're gonna, be a different age, you're gonna be at a different place in your life, and other parts of your life that you have agency over can also change, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. So if that's based on how you identify, what you like to wear, what you want to be called, that's also up to you, and that's valid. I think it's just so important to I feel like we always hear as actors, and I'll speak for myself. As actors, you always hear that, children are the people to look up to when it comes to acting, because they're so uninhibited and they follow their impulses and stuff. So I think it's important to just teach kids to not inhibit so much of themselves for the sake of a flawed system that we have in place for so long, about gender, about, identity, about expression. I think it's just important from a young age to let children know you have agency and you are valid in however you choose to identify, and people should respect that. So that's what I'm going to say.
To add to that, there is no wrong or right to it. I think that's the one thing a lot of kids worry, am I gonna get in trouble, or what do you want? And it's there's no wrong or right to it. You know what I'm saying? And just allow that imagination and that creativity and that non-judgmental nature of children, to allow that to inform these stereotypical norms that sometimes their family puts on them, or just society in general puts on them. And just know that there's no wrong way to do this and there's no right way to do this, and you are perfect who you are, however you want to identify.
I played a decidedly genderqueer Merlin in a TYA, Theater for Young Audiences, adaptation of Sword in the Stone by Dana Brooke, directed by Dave Perini at the B Street Theater in Sacramento. I do want to give them a shout out because they do incredible TYA work. Specifically, they have a whole season of TYA programming that runs alongside their main stage programming. And when they hired me to play Merlin, you know, they were like, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, if they're a shape-shifting wizard, why on earth would they ever be an old cis man? You know? So we made, you know, I helped design the look. It was again, a very, decidedly gender-fucked Merlin, right? And then the playwright was like, great, do you want to change the pronouns? What do you want the pronouns to be? You know? And these are, again, and then we performed this for thousands of elementary schoolers, and all they cared about was that I did magic. You know, there are ways to introduce the idea of gender nonconformity, or certainly through the idea of play, which is what we all are doing anyway, and performativity in more explicit ways such as that, and in more subvertive or smaller ways. But TYA is a great place to show youth that it is okay to play, which is just an extension of what we do with gender every day.
It just goes to show that like ignorance is taught. We teach children to be intolerant. Like the fact that they were like, oh, like they do magic, that's incredible. Like that's what they were focusing on. Like I played Mary Poppins, the production of Mary Poppins once in high school. I remember being worried about people being like, oh, they can't play that character. They're a person of color. They can't, why are they playing Mary Poppins? The kids did not care. They believed that that I was her. And then it was only adults who were like, oh, that's interesting. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the fact of the matter, is that like kids are so open and accepting to so many things. And it's we that teach them to not do that. And so I think it's important to just like encourage the opposite side of it.
Yeah, I was going to add to the conversation of, I think it was the teacher who asked it. Oh, sorry, were you all frozen and then I cut you off?
Oh no, I thought I had unmuted, but I hadn't. But it was like to Sushma's point that I was telling Kevin that in fourth grade, I was a Black Christopher Columbus. And like my teacher at the time who cast me in that, she was Black. And it was just like, and then as I got older and I learned about who Christopher Columbus was, I was like, oh my God, like I was part of my teacher's like political movement. And I was so honored to be a part of that, to be like, yeah, you know what I'm saying? It was a Black person who discovered America, bro. You know, it wasn't this like, you know, white European like man, you know? And it was just like, murderer. Right, exactly. So it was just like, and that's the thing, it's just like we as kids, we don't think about those things, you know what I'm saying? And it doesn't hit us till later on that once we like place these biases or these like prejudices on us from our families or the people around us, that it's like, oh, yeah. So this is the perfect time.
Yeah, I do think that's it. It's like, it's about challenging your own biases. What are the stories being told in your classroom? Who's coming into your classroom? You know, what examples are you giving? That I think is an important part of that. And I think in terms of introducing with pronouns, especially youth, and especially as this conversation is more prevalent, of like holding that lightly, because people may have many pronouns over the course of their life, so that we're not trying to assign people, but just giving an opportunity for them to identify so we can use the pronouns they want to use in that moment, but maybe not permanently. Are there any other things that we want to make sure we say before we go? Will?
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm sorry, I was scrolling through the questions, so I don't know if this has been said already, but if it hasn't, and allow it to be optional. I mean, especially for the youth. And optional in a room of adults does not mean like I'm a cisgender person and I don't actually really feel like saving my pronouns because it should be obvious. Optional means like, you know what, I might really not have the clear answer right now, so I'm not ready to identify myself in that way. Yeah, but I mean, especially for kids, like, so even for those of us who know exactly what we want to be called, there's a heightened pressure about saying it sometimes, depending on the circumstance in the room. So I think allowing space to say it if you'd like is good. But I was just going through a bunch of these chats and trying to like combine a bunch of questions into like one, like, what do I do about company housing or dressing rooms, or do I refer to the gender of the character, or like this, that, or the other thing? Like, so often my answer to things is just like, ask the individual. Just ask them how you can support them and what they need. And while you're doing that asking, think to yourself about like the sort of assumptions that you make, and interrogate those when there's no non-binary person around to call you on them. Just think about how you operate your entire field and world and decision-making process on gender, and then think about if you have to. I think maybe you don't.
Yeah, there's some still really gendered language entrenched in equity rules, for example. And so again, yes, to Will's point, ask me what dressing room I feel comfortable in, A. And then B, once you put me in that dressing room, maybe don't have the words men's dressing room on it with my name underneath. You know, like you got so close. Yeah, so ask people.
Yeah, and that was like, to what you were just saying with our show, you know, when we were transferring from Milwaukee to Arizona Theater Company, it was just like, there was this like, because we only have we have a cis female actor in the show, you know, and it was just like, well, since she's the only one, she'll get her own dressing room. But then it was just like, well, why can't, because she and I were the closest, I was like, why can't she and I be together? You know what I'm saying? So it's just like these conversations, ask, yes. And just like, also just like, yeah, create the space for people to be like, well, I don't feel comfortable with that. So ask, but like, watch your tone. You know?
Well, I would say, and this, piggybacking off of that as my final closing thought, is that, oh no, I lost it. Continue.
One more. I'm so sorry, Kip. No, one thing that I really want to say. Somebody asked about being non-binary or TGNC as in tech. So like you know, stage crew, lighting designers. If I don't know if they're still watching, but if you find me on Facebook, you can message me and I can connect you with some people who I know who are in tech and stage crew and stuff like that from like college and other places that I worked at. Please feel free to reach out. I can connect y'all.
I mean, I would just say that, like, you know, this has been such an honor to be in this like conversation with you all, and we hope that like we offered some, you know, answers to these questions. I know we can't cover it all, but it's just like, one of the things that I want to say is just like, coming from Oklahoma and just like a super just like religious place, and you know, from a Black community where it's like you're taught that a boy is supposed to be a boy and a girl, and use Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, and like all of these things, like I can go as far as I want and like portray a gender non-conforming person on Showtime. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, and if I can come from that and be in that position right now to date and like be in a space where it's like, I mean, being on that set was just amazing just because we had every different type of person on that set. And then it was like, and then I get to be in this position. It's just like a huge gift, but also just a testimony that like anyone, you can go as far as you want to, you know, in this career path and then your gender expression and still be celebrated and appreciated and loved and work.
Yes, and I received it. You helped me. I mean, what I always like to say is that like whoever's watching, cis folk, your cisness is not a blank canvas, and my transness is not a hurdle to overcome. That we are all capable of storytelling, and that my gender identity is not something I have to circumnavigate in order to do my job. It's not a crutch I lean upon. It is just another tool that I use to understand the world and to reframe the experiences of characters through a lens of my own understanding, right? And moreover, bringing TGNC folk into your institution, casting them in unique, unexpected ways or as plain as day, benefits your community at large. that inviting us into your spaces has more benefits than just the way in which our identities manifest on stage. Our work does not stop and end there. There is so much value in including those voices on your stage and in your stories as a means to let your community and your patrons know that you are invested in shining lights in to all the corners, right? So yeah.
I'm gonna put my social media.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Oh yeah, if anyone wants to share their social media handle, you type it in the chat. We'll share that. We'll talk about doing this again, but I just feel really energized and joyful in a way that is sometimes hard these days. So I just really appreciate getting to be in this space with all of you. All of you have really, whether you know it or not, affected me in ways. And I just appreciate what you're doing, that you would take time for this. And I appreciate all of you who have stayed with us for this time. I think it's trending. I have no idea, actually. I don't know what that means, but I hope so. Okay, anyone else have anything they want to share? If not, I guess we'll just take it offline.
Thank you, Emily. We love you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A big thank you to Emily and a big thank you to the people who are listening.
Yes, and to Actors Theater.
Can't wait to hug you all.
Yeah.
I'd give a lot for a hug right now. A lot.
Thank
I know,
you,
isn't this
Emily.
weird? We're quarantine buddies though, so it's
Right.
fine.
It's fine.
Okay, well, I think we're going to take ourselves off live, but you don't have to leave yet. Okay.
Bye, Facebook.